International Standard ISO IEC 20000-1 2018 Information Technology Service Management. Clause 4 Context of the Organization. Hi friends, I welcome you all here at TNV Academy. Today we are going to talk with you about the Clause 4.2 Understanding the Needs and Expectations of the Interested Parties of an International Standard ISO IEC 20000-1 2018 Information Technology Service Management. In this session, we shall cover all the requirements of Clause 4.2 Understanding the Needs and Expectations of Interested Parties in detail along with appropriate examples for your ease. As the requirement of the Clause 4.2 depend upon the requirement of Clause 1, Scope of Standard, and also Clause 4.1, I would like to recommend you referring Clause 1, Scope, and Clause 4.1, Understanding the Organization and its Context of ISO 20000-1 2018. Also, for better understanding of Clause 4.2. So please go through Clause 1 and Clause 4.1 of this standard, which will indeed help you understanding the documentation requirement at later stages, if any. Let's discuss now about the outcome of this session. After completing this session, you will be enabled to understand, verify the implementation of the requirement of Clause 4.2 of the ISO 20000-1 2018. You will learn about the interested parties that are relevant to the SMS and the services, and will also learn about the relevant requirements of the interested parties. Before starting Clause 4.2, let me explain you in brief ISO 20000-1 2018 standard. The ISO 20000-1 2018 standard provides organizations with a set of requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving a service management system SMS. Organizations can utilize the guidance in this standard as a framework on how to successfully manage a SMS. In September 2018, ISO 20000-1 2018 Service Management System requirements was updated to address the growing needs and challenges in the delivery of IT service management. Now, let's start with the Clause 4.2, Understanding the Needs and Expectations of Interested Parties. The requirements of the Clause 4.2 of the standards are: the organization shall determine A. the interested parties that are relevant to the SMS and the services. B. the relevant requirement of these interested parties. Note, the requirements of interested parties can include service, performance, legal and regulatory requirements, and contractual obligations that relate to the SMS and the services. If we talk about the mandatory documents, retention of documents, there are no mandatory documents or records need to be maintained to meet this requirement. Now, let's understand who are the interested parties. The interested parties are those stakeholders who receive your products or services which may be impacted by them, or those parties who may otherwise have a significant interest in your organization. The Clause 4.2 of ISO 20000-1 2018 states that the organization shall determine relevant interested parties and relevant requirements of the appropriate concerned parties. Relevant interested parties to be considered are those that could affect or potentially affect the organization's ability to constantly provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, monitor and review information related to interested parties and relevant requirements. Firstly, the organization will need to define external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose. What are the relevant issues, both inside and out, that have influence on what the organization does, that would affect its capability to accomplish the intended outcomes of its management system? It should be noted that the term issue covers not only problems which would have been the subject of the precautionary action in previous standards, but also important topics for the management system to address, such as any market assurance and governance goals that the organization might set for its management system. Next, the organization has to determine relevant interested parties and relevant requirements of relevant interested parties. An interested party is a person or organization that can be affected by, or recognize themselves to be affected by a decision or activity that's within the scope of the management system. There will be those external interested parties that enforce specific legal, regulatory, or contractual requirements in an organization. There may also be requirements specified by internal interested parties. For example, management and staff, permanent and temporary. There is no requirement in this international standard for the organization to consider interested parties which have been determined by the organization not to be relevant to its service management system. Similarly, there is no requirement to address a particular requirement of a relevant interested party if the organization considers that the requirement is not relevant. Determining what is relevant or not relevant is reliant whether or not it has an impact on the organization's ability to regularly provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, or the organization's aim to improve customer satisfaction. The organization can decide to determine supplementary needs and expectations that will assist it to meet its service objectives. However, it is at the organization's choice whether or not to accept requirements to satisfy interested parties beyond what is required by this international standard ISO 20000-1 2018. For example, one tool which can be used for determining the relevant requirement of relevant interested party is Stakeholder Analysis. The table explains the types of external interested parties and their possible needs and expectations. Type of external interested parties, possible needs and expectations, regulators, compliance and reporting, shareholders, profitability and strategies for growth, neighbors and communities, social responsibility and engagement, local authorities and government consultation and information. You can also find a video session on stakeholder analysis in our portal. Now, coming to an important aspect of the standard, practice writing non-conformity under this clause. I would explain you the process of writing non-conformities. First of all, what exactly is a non-conformity? Non-conformity refers the organization is not fulfilling of the requirements of one or more provisions of the clauses of the ISO 20000-1 2018. Non-conformances are undercovered during verification, introspection, or testing activities. If your test findings reveal misalignments in your requirements, that's a non-conformance. Non-conformity may be of two types: major non-conformity and minor non-conformity. A minor non-conformity is the failure to conform to a requirement that, in the auditor's opinion, and there is no failure of the service management system. It may be single observed lapse or isolated incident where there is minimal risk of non-conforming product being released to the customer. Or one of its processes, or the failure to address a key ISO 20000-1 2018 requirement. Now, let me explain how to write an effective non-conformance report. To achieve the main goal of an effective non-conformance report, you should follow some guidelines which I am describing in detail now. First guideline is to describe in detail the issue that caused the non-conformance. The responsible person for opening the non-conformance report should provide details of the issue that caused the non-conformance, including the who, what, when, and where of detecting the non-conformance. This description needs to be clear and understandable, so the non-conformance can be investigated correctly if needed. Second one is to include the requirements not being met. you must note the requirement that the organization has not fulfilled. So you ensure that the responsible person for addressing the non-conformance understands the exact requirement that is being violated. The more specific you are about the issue, the more effective the corrective action will be. Some examples of requirements not being met can be client requirements, ISO standards, regulatory requirements, etc. The third guideline is to create an action plan to carry out the necessary corrections and corrective actions. This is probably the most relevant step since the action plan contains the instruction on how to overcome the non-conformance, and if you perform it correctly, you will be able to reduce the consequences of the non-conformance, and minor issues will not grow into a major problems for the organization. Depending on the depth of the non-conformity, two different approaches are possible: performing only the corrections or also the corrective actions. Corrections are the activities that deal only with the consequences of a non-conformance. For example, if an internal audit did not take into account the whole scope of the management system, and then the correction will be to perform an additional internal audit that will cover the whole scope. Corrective actions go a step further from corrections. They analyze the cause of non-conformance and they will focus on eliminating the cause in order to prevent the same problem from happening again. Using the same example of internal audit, the root cause could be the internal auditor was not trained properly, or the person who had defined the internal audit program was not informed about the required scope. In principle, the decision to open a corrective action will be made if the non-conformity significantly affects the achievement of the goals of the management system. Subsequently, it is necessary to indicate the responsibilities and action to be carried out with the non-conforming material or service that originated the problem. For example, return of product to supplier, reprocessing of parts, agreeing on new conditions with the customer, etc. Fourth guideline is to verify the closure of the actions. You need to include in the non-conformance report the results of the actions taken to solve the problem. In case the non-conformity has not been solved after carrying out planned actions, another report should be opened with the details of the original non-conformance. And the last guideline is to monitor and measure NCRs. Non-conformance reports are input of the management review and they are key part of the continual improvement of the system. You can group those non-conformance reports by different elements such as origin of the non-conformance or date, and analyze this data to obtain paramount information for the continual improvement of the organization. I hope these guidelines will help you in writing an effective non-conforming report for your client organization. Now, coming to common mistakes auditor do while auditing clause 4.1. Some of the common mistakes made by auditors while auditing are putting questions which are irrelevant for the organization. Some auditors start thinking for the option, while auditors need to understand the client process and to decide if the client can achieve result of the management standard system through their own process. Auditors start consulting the client which is out of the reach of auditing. Auditors starts expecting those documents and records in clause where this may not be mandatory. Auditors impose their opinion without facts. Auditors report findings but don't provide evidence. Auditors stick off checklist without considering the bigger picture. Auditors believe the paperwork and ignore the facts. Auditors feel obliged to find errors. Auditors allow cost cutting to staff the audit. It is highly recommended that being an auditor, you should avoid these common mistakes while doing ISO audits to make it successfully implemented. Dear friends, we have now come to the conclusion of this training session. See you soon with an exciting new topic. Till then, goodbye.